Thank you very much. Thank you, Harsh, DAKSH, and Bangalore International Center for giving me this honor to deliver this lecture. My presentation today will be in 4 parts. In the first, I will make some preliminary remarks about the title, Deeper Vulnerabilities. In the second, I'll give an outline of my own broad conception of democracy. I think I don't use PowerPoints that often, but I thought this might be useful just to have one single slide. In the third, I will, I think I should tell you that some of the lecture is based on an article that I was invited to write for a book which was part of the Ethicon series conceived by some political theorists abroad. And they had, the title was Democracy and Morality, Secular and Religious Perspectives. And they gave me this challenge to write on democracy in the Hindu tradition. So I never really worked on anything like that. But I thought I'd take this up, and so I wrote a piece for them, and some of what I have to say here is drawn from it. And as you know, democracy is a modern, representative democracy, indirect democracy, and really democracy itself is a modern idea. So you can't really talk about the history of democracy and hope that you will find, some great democratic forms of government in the past and disrupted by some hostile forces, only to be rejuvenated and then be born in some other. No, that's not, that story is simply doesn't exist, because democracy, as I said, isn't a very old idea. However, I do think that key elements that either go on to become constitutive features of modern democracy, or are strong, or are strong preconditions or prerequisites of democracy, are available in the past, even in so-called monarchical systems. There can be democratic practices. There can be a milieu which has a very strong democratic element. I think it's important to recover and retrieve that. And I do think that there are some elements in India, and these elements are found in the very deep sort of past, Indian past. And those of us who want to literally invent, in the sense in which Hobsbawm and Terence Ranger talked about, invention of tradition. If they wish to reinvent a tradition of democracy, then they have to look at these elements. And people like Nehru, Ambedkar, Gandhi, they did sort of play a very important role in inventing such a tradition, or else our constitution would not have been made we wouldn't have had the constitution in 1950. So, and I think this also fulfills another need. I think all of us have the need to connect with a larger cosmic space. And just as we need to do that, we also have this need to connect ourselves with some deeper time. We want to relate to it, and I think you can also see this as part of that project of relating to some deeper past. So my third brief, I'll spend some time briefly on that. And finally, I'll come to the real topic, the deeper vulnerabilities. What are the long-standing, deep-seated impediments to the proper functioning of constitutional democracy? Those impediments that make it fragile, that make it unstable, that continuously generate crises, and if they become too strong, they can even undermine democracy. And my focus is more on ideas, because I am not good at anything else. Yeah, so that's the introductory part. So let me move to the second. So why deep vulnerabilities? Now, when something is vulnerable, we know that it's prone to being damaged. It's extremely fragile. So there is a kind of inherent weakness somewhere. But these vulnerabilities can either be conjunctural, that is to say, many factors can contingently come together and make that entity prone to injury, to sickness, or to failure. Or these factors can be entrenched, very firmly established. There can be layers upon layers over years, the sedimented they can, as I said, they're long-standing, they go back in time, and because they are so fixed and so well established, they're not that easy to dislodge. They don't disappear very easily. Even when you think that they're gone, they have a way of making a reappearance. And therefore, you need sustained effort, a very hard, long collective struggle in order to reduce their impact, or at least, if not altogether get rid of them. I don't know if we can ever get rid of these things. But since there are social constructs, I think they can be removed. They're not natural, but still, we have a hard time even noticing them. And after we begin to notice them and acknowledge them, hard time getting rid of them. These are our psychosocial habits, these mental and social habits that are ingrained in us. We are not even conscious of some of them. And even when they've been written about, we tend to forget them because we tend to forget the relevance of those texts where they're found. So I will. So that's what I'm really going to. Hopefully, I'm going to try and highlight. I'm sure there are many people who are much better than I am, who can talk about these things. But this is one attempt, and always open to revision, correction, and so on. Okay. Right. So the third part, or the second part. So what's my understanding of democracy? So I was just before I was kind of putting my notes together For this lecture, I looked at a recent Journal of Democracy, the recent issue of the Journal of Democracy, and I found a very famous political theorist, Adam Brzezinski. He had given the following definition of democracy. Democracy, he says, is a system in which citizens collectively decide by whom and to some extent how they will be governed. That looks like a pretty decent definition. And he adds, it's the same paragraph, short, a regime is democratic if and only if people are free to choose, including to remove governments. Now, I think there's something missing here. Either some key features of democracy are assumed to be so obvious by Adam Brzezinski, so they're so obvious that he doesn't even consider them worth mentioning. But for a political theorist to do that is a little odd, because they want to make everything inarticulate, articulate, they want to make everything implicit, explicit, and they want to define things, and even those things which cannot really be defined and should not be defined, but they do. So either it's that or it's an omission, and unwitting or sort of wittingly or unwittingly he's omitted something. And if this is an omission, for whatever reason, I think it's shocking. So what are these? So he talks about democracy being a system in which citizens collectively decide. But who are these citizens? In my view, a democracy that is not inclusive is not really a democracy. In other words, all people living in a particular territory, regardless of religion, gender, class, education, caste, race, all are citizens. And I think this is something which we need to mention. A modern democracy is definitionally inclusive. You cannot exclude any group of people mainly on account of some feature, which is a kind of a permanent and durable feature of those groups. Second, he doesn't say, which is so obvious, all citizens have to be equal. You cannot have a democracy where there is no equality of citizenship. How can there be a democracy if some people in that system are living as second-class citizens? In other words, their rights are not the same as the rights of other citizens. If they don't have the right to stand for public office, for example, then you don't really have a democracy. So, unequal second-class citizens are not citizens. And I think in this definition, you'll see that neither equal citizenship nor inclusive citizenship is a part of the definition. And the third, a regime is democratic if and only if people are free to choose, including to remove governments. But how? I think the third very important thing, which ought to be explicit, is that this choice must be completely unconstrained and certainly free from the threat of violence. Pacification of politics is a precondition of democracy and should be part of the understanding, if not the definition of democracy. So you can't have power being transferred under the threat of violence or violence. You cannot have a violent transfer of power. There has to be a peaceful transfer of power. That's absolutely central to democracy. So pacification of politics is also central. Now, many features follow from this idea of inclusive, equal citizenship and peaceful transfer of power. And I think I would say that this is part of a minimalist definition of democracy. I say minimalist because very often in political theory, one makes a distinction between minimalist and maximalist. Minimalists are, are democracies which are constituted by intrinsic qualities or intrinsic values. And maximalists are those which also include within them extrinsic values. So, for example, if you say that we have democracy in order to achieve economic equality, or you have democracy because you want to have a very high level of development of productive forces, superior technology. I mean, it's a little odd to think of that, but still, you could think that only in democracies can you have a really high-class, highly developed society, technological society. Or some such, then of course that will be, outside of the core features of democracy. But this, which Przofsky talks about, minimalist, I think all of these, even though this looks like a very, very thick idea, I think this is part of the minimalist conception of democracy. It follows, for example, from inclusiveness that the state or the system cannot really have a strong alliance with any one linguistic, religious, or ethnic group. So I don't see how a Christian state or an Islamic state or a Hindu state, which is already given privilege to one section of people living in the territory, how that can be a democratic state, because it excludes certain groups, right? Similarly, so a principle of non-discrimination, again, is very central to equality of citizenship. If you have some people who are excluded from certain key aspects of well-being generated by democracy, or they're excluded from the democratic process, or not excluded, discriminated by the state in the democratic process, then you really don't have a democracy. Okay? Then, if pacification of politics is a key feature of democracy, if violence is not acceptable in a democracy, obviously we're talking about ideals where really, there are lots of ways in which violence is endemic to many so-called democracies. But that sort of reduces their democratic quality. It doesn't enhance it. It doesn't make them adequate to the idea of democracy. But if that is the case, if there is pacification of politics, and so there has to be, of course, if people have to collectively choose their representatives or collectively decide on issues which are of central concern to them, on which decisions are absolutely necessary, then there will be difference and this difference has to be sorted out. If not removed, at least people have to sit down, or not literally sit down, but sit together or communicate together and arrive at some decision. And all this presupposes the presence of an open and vibrant public sphere, public space, where matters are openly expressed, discussed, and debated. There is free exchange and contestation that takes place. And it also implies that dissent is going to be tolerated. If people are dissenting from your views, you're not going to persecute them. It also presupposes that all people who differ from you and who compete with you, who are your rivals, will be seen only as temporary adversaries and not as permanent enemies. So the idea of the other as an enemy, that is not very conducive to democracy. The other thing that becomes quite important in the whole democratic process is that when you have to arrive at certain decisions, especially over which you have deep disagreements, then you learn to live with the second best solution rather than the one that maximizes your interests. In other words, some compromise is the ability to arrive at a compromise, not compromise over principles, but compromise over differences which may emerge from competing principles or competing applications of principles, right? You prepare to negotiate and compromise on them. And these requires two key virtues which are very central to public participation and to citizenship. One is what I called, which I'll tell you where I'm getting this from in a few minutes. But one which is Sanyam, self-restraint, and the other is the quality of being Bahushruta, which is to listen to the many, and which implies open-mindedness. You're willing to listen to everybody. So these are two key values of citizenship, two virtues of citizenship. Finally, effective citizenship presupposes that everyone has a modicum of well-being. I don't think it is integral to democracy that there be economic equality. I don't hold that view. But it's crucial that everybody, in order to effectively exercise their citizenship, they have some, minimum material level of well-being. There is a link between that. Okay. Now, let me come to, just keep this in mind, because when we come to elements that are deep in the Indian traditions, and I will focus on, what I broadly call, not the Hindu in the modern, as derived from modern Hinduism, but Hindu in the older sense. This is widely sort of Hindu tradition. It's much more inclusive than you think it is. So elements that go deep into those multiple traditions, which give strength to modern democracy, and then finally elements that are deep in that go deep in that tradition, which one should really be wary of because they can gravely undermine Indian democracy. Okay. As we know, democracy today is going through a very rough patch everywhere, not just in India, but everywhere. And a number of factors threaten democracy. And I'm just prepared a random sort of list of what came to my mind, and not necessarily in order of importance. It's not. I'm not giving more weightage to one or to the other. Just putting them. It's a random list, but just very quickly: populism, the kind of a certain misuse of social media that gives rise to demagoguery on the one hand, and which is hell-bent upon collapsing the distinction between what is really true, reasonably true, and what is false. Information overload, which creates a lot of confusion. Complete, a very inhumane, robust capitalism, which is only profit-motivated, but that all capitalism is. But this is something, absolutely unprincipled, robust capitalism, which is so pervasive today, crony, monopolistic, whatever you might call it, which is which springs from just no compassion, a lot of intense greed, the idea of grabbing things at whatever cost. Then the misuse of the legal machinery, the selective use of legal machinery, the growth of conditions whereby you actually want to liquidate the opposition or to asphyxiate the opposition by, again, as I said, by misusing the legal machinery, by a selective use of the legal machinery. Then electoral machinery makes sure that you don't have a neutral, impartial electoral machinery. The electoral machinery itself is manipulated in such a way that it only favors one and not the others. Total control of media, a climate of fear, keeping people on the edge all the time, a lot of harassment. So you're neither put in jail, but not are you feel safe and secure. You're always on the verge of being raided by some department or the other. And also, this should have come earlier, infantilizing the opposition. Very, very common these days. It's part of the right-wing toolkit, right? You just make the opposition, not only, try to make the opposition ineffective and by any means, and one of the ways in which you do that is by making them look like they're always, dumb, foolish, idiotic, silly, nothing here, and so on. Okay, I can go on. Destroying self-correcting mechanisms. Yes, of course, institutions being undermined. Now, all these are very, very important. And somebody who really wanted to give a analysis of what ails democracy and why democracies are on the verge of dying out will spend a lot more time on all these factors. If I were giving a different lecture, I would do that myself. But as I said, I wanted to focus on deep, long-standing impediments, and therefore on those mental and social habits. And I will quickly come to that. But I just want to say that there is a connection between all this that I've listed and what I'm going to say towards the end of my lecture, which is also what I wanted to really focus on, but I won't have that much time. And that is that all these things are reactivated. See, they rely on there's this list of factors that I mentioned which are undermining democracy. They are getting a lot of their purchase and a lot of the weight by somehow reactivating those traditional deep-seated impediments. And so there are people who are out there trying to appeal to those aspects, those ideas in those texts, which are texts which are anti-democratic, a part of the anti-democratic tradition. They appeal to them, but they don't even have to appeal to them because these are set in the patterns of behavior that we haven't really tackled them over a period of time enough. So they are part of our social imaginary. They're part of our collective understanding. Okay. Right. So I'll move. I think I better pay more attention to time. So yeah, before I come to, I'm still postponing coming to the real what I'm really going to focus on, but I don't think I can do that before I mention at least one or two things that have actually that have made it possible for us to sustain democracy in India. To actually, they were part of the inspiration behind the anti-colonial struggle, and not only our anti-colonial struggle, but constantly telling us, as we were fighting British imperialism, that what will come in its place is something which is really worthwhile, which is going to be inclusive, and which is we will have a constitution, a constitutional democracy. So what are these features in the Indian traditions? which might strengthen our democracy, and which all of us should very proudly, with great pride, claim. Okay, as ours and as helping us. Now, the first of this is the idea that there are many gods and goddesses, and they're all translatable. They live in the same semantic universe. Even though some gods and goddesses have some kind of an ontological, hierarchical relationship, in many cases, these are equivalent. So that a god and goddess in one culture can easily be translated as of equal value in the culture of the gods and goddesses of some other culture. Behind this idea is a very interesting idea. This is normally, in 17th, 18th century, this was, people invented a term called polytheism for that. But I think this is a very deeply pluralistic idea. And what is interesting about it is that it rules out the other an idea that's competing with it and which is hostile to it, which is that there is one true God and all the other gods are false. This idea that you have to have exclusive monotheism, the idea there has to be exclusive allegiance, that idea is there. This is an idea which is very ancient. It's there in all cultures. It was there in the Arab region. It was there in Africa. It is certainly there in Asia, and it was present in India too. And what is helpful in India is that just at the time that in some parts of Egypt and in Palestine, just when this new idea was coming up that there is one true God and all other gods are false, in India, instead of this idea replacing the idea of multiple gods and goddesses, or even inclusive monotheism, which is the idea that all these multiple gods and goddesses are manifestations of one God. Gandhi later used this a lot. Just around the same time, we were developing a very strong, what we might call, tradition of atheistic worldviews. I mean, Mimamsa is completely non-reliant on the idea of God. Even gods and goddesses are not important. Buddha, early Buddhism, is completely free of the idea of God. Jainism is free of the idea of God. And I think what is important in India, particularly, I don't know about other cultures, I'm sure that is the case in China around the same time. In India, we were finding ways of accepting that there are different ethics of self-fulfillment, and some are gods and goddesses dependent, some are a single God dependent, and some don't depend at all on either God or gods and goddesses. And this very deep pluralism of cohabitation of different worldviews, we were developing that in the first millennia before the Common Era. So that is just the period when so I think this has been a great sort of advantage to our traditions here, as indeed it has been until very recently, at least, in Japan and China, in many Asian cultures. This is one big thing for inclusiveness, and this deep pluralism is something that we really need to protect. And I see the Sarv Dharm Sambhav idea. This dharm, of course, is a wrong, it's mistranslation. this is not it's not correct, but we can well imagine what is meant by this, that all these different religious philosophical worldviews have to be deeply respected. We don't have to be in each, but we can empathize with even those that are radically different from us. So that's one. The second, my God, this is the most important thing in our tradition, which is Ashoka, Ashokan thinking, who is inventing a new socio-political ethic. And there are 5 features which I need to mention quickly. One is pacification, the idea of pacification of politics, the idea that war must not be the way, that physical conquest must be replaced by what he called moral, dhammic conquest. That I think is extremely important. And it's when he apologizes, and this is there in the inscriptions, when he shows contrition and when he apologizes, that apology is not merely in word, it's an action, it's something that he doesn't want to do ever again. The idea of imperial conquest, gone in Ashoka. So that's one, pacification. The second is this invention of the idea of Dhamma, which I call socio-political ethic, which is not only for the ruled, but equally for the ruler. So something above all of us, which we all have to, in a sense, abide by, which the ruler must abide by as much as the ruled. And that is the source of the idea of the Constitution, in a way. I mean, it's the earliest ideas of Constitution are found here in the Ashokan idea of Dhamma. Third, the duty of the king is to, and these are words that I'm using from his inscriptions, Sarva Jana Hita, Sarva Jana Sukha. So it's the idea that the ordinary lives of people matter. Not only of people, that is to say human beings, but also of all living animals. And there are lots of passages where he talks about what he must do in order to somehow make the lives of both human beings and animals much better than they are. So that idea, I remember I talked about modicum of well-being as an important key. So this is again something that develops in monarchical systems that can be of great use even later when we move to different systems. Then treatment of slaves, of prisoners, servants. So a certain degree of minimal decency has to be there. Ashoka has specific, not injunctions, because he doesn't believe, after a certain point, he doesn't believe in commanding. He pays much more emphasis on nijjati, persuasion, rather than niyama, which is law. And he wants to tell us how we must treat slaves. So this is a society which has servants, it has slaves, it has prisoners. So let's not, be mistaken about. We shouldn't delude ourselves into believing that all these things didn't exist. There's a monarchical system. There are subjects. There is slavery, but there are limits to what you can do to even slaves. And of course, when we abolish these things, then things have to be hugely different. But there is a certain idea of minimal decency. And then the absolutely stunning idea of what I call Sanyam, Paushruta, civility. And let me just lay the background for it. How much time do I have? Well, I've already taken 40 minutes, so I'll take another 10 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe 50, because the main thing I've still not come to. But this is something which is extremely important. Ashoka recognizes that we have what he calls pashandas. We have different religio-philosophical groups And he says, well, they cannot live separately. They cannot live in ghettos. They have to live face to face. But when they live face to face and they encounter one another, I am adhering to one worldview and the other person is adhering to another worldview and they're living face to face. So how do they relate to one another? And Ashoka says, well, if you are committed to your worldview, then and you're against somebody else's worldview, or meaning you differ from his worldview, there are bound to be things that you dislike about that person or his views. But don't privatize them, don't keep them within yourself. Say them out, but only on 3 conditions. All of this stated in the so-called 12th edict, which was not really an edict, but it is in the 12th inscription, and found in multiple places all over India and in Afghanistan and Pakistan. What are they? Said, be critical of the other if you have a good reason to. Even when you have a good reason to, only on an appropriate occasion. And even when the occasion is appropriate, moderately, never immoderately. Because if you do it immoderately, not only, he doesn't say it, but not only will it be counterproductive, but it'll be demeaning. This is not what he says, but it's to be inferred. But not only that, if you are committed to your worldview, then you'll be dying to say something good about that worldview. Otherwise, your commitment is worthless. You have to. So don't keep it to yourself, say it. If you think that there is something good in your worldview, say it to a person who doesn't agree with you. But again, only under 3 conditions. Do it with good reason, appropriate occasion, moderately, not immoderately. No self-glorification. This is something which is mentioned in the inscription. Don't go, gaga about, And all this is important. This encounter is important so Bahushruta, listen to the many. And this encounter is important for mutual growth. Your own worldviews are imperfect. And God knows, they'll never be perfect. But it's only through mutual encounter that you will enable the growth of one another and you will enable the growth of Dhamma, which is that overall morality, ethic, social, political ethic, right? So, stable norms of civility, so crucial to democracy and so relevant to our times, developed by a monarch in a totally different system, but abiding relevance for all of us today. So, and a certain degree, people talk about ancient liberalism and modern liberalism, but I would talk here about, I have to look for other words, but just to make each other, just to make myself understood by you, because these are terms that are easily available to you. It's an ancient political liberalism. What he's talking about is, let's find a common ground. Let's find you have different views, but we have to find ways of living together. And we are looking for a common foundation. And so the impartiality of the monarch with respect to different religious philosophical perspectives is something which is absolutely necessary. It's incumbent on the ruler to be impartial. And there are terms like Vyavahar Samta, Danda Samata. These are terms that are used in the inscriptions. He's asking his officials to do that. So, I think, I'll skip something, but I think these are elements that have been used by Ambedkar, Nehru, Gandhi, all of these elements in the building or the invention of a tradition which can be called a democratic tradition. Now, what is it that is impeding all this? Which is as strong as, and sometimes stronger than, and today certainly is even stronger. I will mention 4 such things, and then I'll finish the lecture. One is the presence of a violent, muscular, warrior ethic. Long, it's there in the Rig Veda. A warrior ethic that glorifies, it's understandable, in a time, when there are people looking for more territories. I mean, I'm not justifying it, but, this is something, it's not, well, but in the Rig Veda, it's very clear. Warrior ethic that glorifies violence. And the big hero is Indra, who is not only the god of sky, rain, and thunder, but he's also the god of war. And there are verses which say, well, through sheer brawn, he pushes apart the world. He breaks it into two halves, heaven and earth. And the language that is used to glorify Indra is extremely masculine and violent. With his, and I'm just summarizing it, there are long passages in the paper that I've written. With his ojas, a Sanskrit term signifying both physical strength and power of rulership and domination, Indra smashes and pulverizes rivals. He destroys, he crushes, he slays, he breaks an enemy's rage. He has a terrifying demeanor. And he embodies male domination and female submission. So, and this is extremely important in cattle raiding expeditions and in territorial conquests. So, and these are the qualities that really matter. Notice how different it is from civility. The qualities matter are shura, veer. It's a kind of courage in the battlefield. Courage in warfare, open warfare. Certainly, this is a very important element, and I can see that this has been present it's in every kingship. This is an important ethic, regardless of early India, Middle India. I'm sure there must be local traditions in Central Asia. Nobody can dare conquer if he did not have these as standards. So those who came from Turks, the Afghans, the Uzbekis, I mean, they must have their own traditions of this kind, and they must have found this very valuable. I can well imagine. So a warrior ethic, and even today, I can see it in the behavior of so many males. This is a thriving culture in India, even today, and it's certainly you can see it. I mean, every time somebody takes mows down a poor person or 10, 15. I remember that incident in UP. Where a minister's son mowed down some activists who were against these laws, and the kind of demeanor that he displays is really it's as if he's living that whole warrior ethic. There is no mark of civility there. The second, very very element of the antidote is the Arthashastra, undoubtedly. Because Arthashastra, as Patrick Oliver has told us, is addressing an absolute monarch who rules in accordance with his will. It's arbitrary will. He doesn't follow any law. And statecraft has priority over everything else. Dharma is barely mentioned. If, after all, it's a treatise on Artha. Artha is this worldly success. It's not economic alone, because it's political. It's primarily a political text. It's political. It's success in achieving power by any means, by hook or by crook. No moral constraints. So what we are getting here is an articulation of a domain of politics that is completely abstracted from morality, from religiosity and from metaphysics. And this is a very important element in the anti-democratic tradition in India. Our politics is saturated by the Arthashastra ethic. Now, whether people actually mention it or not is another matter, but this is something which is very, very strong. Grab, by any means, power, hold on to it, accumulate it. Not money alone, money too. After all, this worldly success includes money. But this is, of course, addressed to so all of that. So this, I think, how it sort of easily merges with this robust capitalism that I just mentioned briefly. How it merges with it. It's a treatise for capitalists and for power-hungry politicians, so, which is is something we've inherited. It's part of us. The third, of course, is the Dharamshastric tradition. Now, I'll quickly go over it. I can say much more about it. I think there are incipient ideas of what we call religion, but the basic thing is a justification of caste hierarchies and the injunction to the king to sustain an order of social order which is saturated by graded inequality, hardly conducive to democracy. And you can see that is not only, it's a mindset that is so prevalent and it's so difficult to dislodge, both patriarchal and justifying the Varna system. And this is one of the most difficult, but because it's so much a part of our social imaginary, it's normative. We ought to be like that. That is the big difficulty. People want, this is something which they expect the other to abide by, even though he or she doesn't benefit from it at all. And only some people benefit from it. But it's the dharma of the Atishudra to serve, or the Shudras to serve, and it's serve who? The high and mighty. And it is not something, it's not a matter of preference. It's not that I want you to do it. It's something which is it's a normative order. You can see the strength of it. Right. And the last bit is something which comes later. These are going really deep into our past. The Dharmashastra is written down in the Manav Dharmashastra, 1st century, after the Common Era. Arthashastra is somewhere around before, maybe 2 centuries before or around the same time. Ashokan is, these two, and the Rig Vedic, the masculine, that is 1500 BC. But this is new. What I call religionization of India. Modernity has brought in not secularization, but religionization of India. Sorry. What do I mean by that? I think we had religio-philosophical perspectives, we had religio-philosophical experiences, but the framing of these experiences was not through the category of what we call religion. We did not have religion. There were embryonic elements of religion, as I said, in the Dharamshastra. There are certainly very strong elements of this religion which come in 16th century against Akbar, funnily, not to aid Akbar, who's conducting different, very fascinating experience with religious views and so on. But there is the Naqshbandi order coming from Afghanistan with Sirhandi. All these people, they want to destroy. They are responsible for the murder of Abul Fazl. They are the ones who are bringing in an idea of religion. But they are not fully successful. A real consolidator of all this is late 18th century, early 19th century idea of which come with colonial missionaries, and we have this idea of religion. Now, what does religion add to all of this, which all these philosophical experiences, religiosity is very old, but three things. One is that idea of true and false religion that I mentioned, which is virtually absent in early India and continues to be highly contested all through. Not only can you, in Kabir, Dadu, all these great figures, but also in the first century, first millennia, you can look at, we've been reading these texts, Jayanta Bhatta's Agam Dambara, Kashmiri Shaivite text, which is so pluralistic, a defense pluralism against the idea of exclusive truth and falsehood. Second, the formation of communities which are very well demarcated, sharply demarcated. And identities are defined in terms of these demarcated communities, which are sharply distinguished from one another. And these identities are categorical. So it's not just the other. The other is not only a radical other, he's an enemy to be fought. Adherence to my doctrine comes with an enemy to be fought. There's a new idea of rivals being permanent enemies, competitors being permanent enemies. And eventually, in 1925, with Mr. Savarkar, the idea that a religious community must have a state of its own. Now, that is something which is a European idea, ethno-nationalist, ethno-religious nationalist idea, which comes in 1492 in Spain, and then it flowers during the wars of religion, and people don't realize how, the history, now, of course, everybody recognizes there's a huge amount of revisionist history being written about the European past, but how bad nationalisms are never Western, right? We know that. So this is deeply undermines pluralism. It creates divisions and conflict, and even violent conflict. And we know the upsurge of communal violence in early 20th century in India as a result of this great infection, really. Okay, so I won't summarize what I said. I've taken 50. I'm almost finished. 160 minutes. All I'm saying is that these ideas are not just shastric, even though I mentioned a lot of arthashastras and this and that, but they are certainly part of our common understanding. They are habits of the heart, of the mind, social habits. They're very difficult to dislodge. And we should never be living in the illusion that by creating the Constitution or by having some electoral democracy, we'll get rid of all this. This is a long battle, and even we seem to have won, for some time. Never rest on your laurels. I mean, they'll come back. This is a very, very long struggle. We have to be alert all the time. Those who believe in the democratic tradition must reckon with the view that there is a very strong anti-democratic tradition in India, which is always threatening us. There's nothing new about it. It will take new forms. It will threaten us, and we'll have to find a way. We'll have to struggle hard. Thank you.
I'm here just to facilitate engagement with the audience. So if anybody has any direct pointed questions, please raise your hand. I will have the mic passed around to you. So yeah.
Thanks, Rajiv. It's a fascinating lecture, made us think of things we don't normally think about. My question is there any specific reason why you did not mention Manusmriti?
I did the Manav Dharma Shastra. The Dharma Shastra that I mentioned, I kept talking about the Dharma Shastra tradition. That actually was the Manav Dharma Shastra, which is the real name of what we call Manusmriti. So I did mention that.
Sandhya is doing a lot of running around. So.
Ronald Dworkin, in his essay on liberalism, says that we make two kinds of moral commitments. One is the pursuit of a good life, which is building the sense of self and community and culture. And the other is the willingness to treat everyone fairly. And he calls the first substantive goals and the other procedural goals. And he says a liberal state is one that takes no view on substantive goals, but is strong on procedural goals, because substantive goals involve cultural identity and the ideal of inclusivity cannot be sustained. And Charles Taylor, in his essay Politics of Recognition, cites this argument of Dworkin and raises a question which he doesn't answer in the essay, saying, is this need to park substantive goals aside and participate in democracy only as a procedural citizen? Is that too high a price to pay? And in that sense, one sees the current crisis of democracy coming from a class of politicians who are wooing an electorate, saying you do not need to pay this price, and not caring whether inclusivity gets thrown aside in the process. So do we need a new theory of democracy that can incorporate this aspiration towards substantive goals?
I think it's the substantive goals can be realized in two different ways. I don't think there's any way that you can get rid of them. I mean, they are active in society. This is only a question of what kind of a state you must have. And of course, the state has to be more on the procedural side than on the substantive side. But much of the society that the state deals with and which it is embedded in is committed to substantive goals. All right, there is no way that human beings can live without some idea of the good life, and therefore some idea of substantive goals, and willy-nilly the state will get involved. So, but in different, depending upon the context and also politics, really, the politics in which, the larger political domain in which the state is functioning, the state will have to take a decision on whether to abstract itself from substantive goals, not permanently, that is impossible, I think, but just contextually, situationally, or whether to be committed to all reasonable substantive goals. In other words, I mean, that's the impartiality can mean either I do not intervene in anything, or I do not help anybody, or do not hinder anybody, I just stay away. Or it can mean that I intervene in everybody, or help everybody, or, so I think I'm sort of, this is not a answer that can be given, on a theoretical basis of the kind that Dworkin is putting forth, that this and not that. I'm sort of more, I'm a value pragmatist on this. Depends on the context, on the political conjuncture. But my view is, you got to be committed to, you have to be a committed pluralist. There is no society which has only one set of coherent substantive goals. There are many, many different groups in society which have very different ideas of to use the language of political liberals, different conceptions of good life. And the state cannot take a permanent view on this, that you should never engage, or you should always disengage, or you should always engage. I mean, I've dealt with this issue in my essays on secularism, and I've used the term principal distance rather than strict separation or strict, interference or intervention or kind of intervention. I think it all depends. I'm a pragmatist, but a value pragmatist. In other words, there are different values which have to be negotiated here. It's. I think that this would be Charles Taylor's position too. Uh, that's what makes him different from maybe people like Dworkin and Rawls. He's as much of a liberal in some senses. He's not only a liberal, he's as much of a liberal as they are. But I think their understanding of their liberalisms are different, and their ideas of how to pursue certain commitments are different. And I'm pretty much influenced by Taylor on this than on much as I regard Dworkin, and I like the idea of overlapping consensus that was put forward by Rawls, and I think that's very similar. That when I read Ashoka, I was always reminded of that. But anyway, I don't know if I've answered your question, but yeah.
Third question here.
Very good one, sir. Actually, I have one question related to democracy and climate change, sir. Is Indian democracy having essential, proper moral and philosophical perspective on climate crisis, sir, actually, with respect to a disintegrated market, civil society and state capabilities, sir?
I didn't get that.
Actually, I repeat again, sir. Is Indian democracy having proper, essential, moral and philosophical perspective on climate crisis?
Climate.
Crisis.
Is there, or what is the shape of it that has to come?
Yes, sir. Our present state and our crisis, entanglements like that, sir.
I think I've been shocked. I don't know much about this. I know the climate crisis is of the deepest importance, but I've not really given a thought to this. I'm appalled, but some people think that this crisis can only be solved by dictatorship, by abandoning democracy. I know some people who I've greatly admired who've taken this view, and I find it very odd. I think what they mean is that we must have very strong laws and a very equally powerful commitment to implementing certain laws in relation to the climate crisis. But why do they want a system which is dictatorial and not democratic? I've never been able to understand why they want to make a jump. I mean, that's in every good democracy, there will be a rule of law, and rule of law has to be implemented firmly. So you cannot have a democracy without a proper, rule of law, and we just have to expand the domain. I mean, look at traffic violations, how they are dealt with in the United States of America and how they're dealt with in India. Why wouldn't we want an equally strong and powerful commitment to the implementation of laws pertaining to traffic violations in India as they are implemented in America? So it's not, you don't need a dictatorship for that. You just need a very strong force to implement it. And I think the same can be done in relation to environmental issues, climate change. I think you make strong laws, and if anybody violates them, you punish them. That's not undemocratic. It's just if the laws are chosen voluntarily, uncoercively by representatives of citizens, and the citizens themselves are chosen in a fair and free manner, once those laws are made, they have to be implemented very firmly, and violators have to be punished. All that you need is that. So I mean, that's my only response to this question.
Yeah.
You're so right when you say that this country is ruled by gods. I mean, Jesus was born poor. Buddha renounced. Ram lost his kingdom. Shiva was a mendicant. I'm just curious to know what you think was the role of Shiva, because he's hardly spoken of in the growth or the evolution of the ethos of this country.
I'm only I'm barely learning about gods and goddesses and their role. I just heard that there was somebody who declared himself to be God recently, but that is just about, I mean, more my contemporary connection with gods and goddesses is not very strong. So I would love to read more. I mean, Shiva. I mean, the only Shiva that I know is the Shiva of Agammadambara and of Abhinavgupta. I mean, the Kashmiri Shivites. I don't know anything. I'm going to learn and promise that I can answer this question better later. But at the moment, I'm
It
just
could just be a little bit of another thought. I just thought so. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
This is with reference to disinformation. Can a democracy survive when disinformation pervades? Of course, even in those Mahabharata days, we had Ashwatthama mentioned. But today, and after that, during the Hitlerian times, we had the Goebbels chapter. But today, we have the IT cells, we have the artificial intelligence, and all aspects of the platforms, be it helping the spread of disinformation. Can a democracy survive at all under these conditions of completely widespread disinformation originating from the government itself? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take 1, 2, 3.
One more, yeah.
Okay.
Me?
Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. I think it was very provocative, as Harish expected. I had I know that you're trying to keep us in the realm of ideas, but I was also trying to relate it to what's happening today. And one thought that went through my head was, a lot of the sort of Shastras and all of that seems to be a sort of Brahminical caste Hindu version of culture and Indian tradition. Do you subscribe to the view that there's a subaltern culture which is different from this, which represents the masses of the Indian population, or do you think it's permeated? It's kind of, that distinction is meaningless at this point. I mean, the Kavariyas might be low caste, but, they're infected by the same disease. And the second thing is that, I was also trying to think that if BJP is the one which is kind of weaponized Brahminical Hinduism, but if you look at the recent publication of this number theory in the Hindustan Times, you look at the caste and gender composition. In a sense, there's not that much to choose from between any of these parties. So is that a kind of a meaningless pursuit to say that, these guys are evil? Actually, there's no real distinction between any of them.
You raised a number of questions. I think there is a difference. I think I said that, to take just one example, this hierarchical mindset is part of a common understanding. And it's part of a normative common understanding, in a sense that even people who are victims in some ways believe in it. And the perpetrators obviously not only believe in it, but want to believe in it and want to reaffirm it all the time because they benefit from it. So everybody is complicit in some ways. That's why it becomes hegemonic, right? So So that is there. Yet, two things. One is that the original, the Manusmriti, when it was written by Brahmins for Brahmins. It is neither a representative text nor a descriptive text. It's a normative text. It's what Brahmins want Brahmins to believe in and what they want Brahmins to do. Doesn't tell us anything about what the nature of society was at that time. How many people actually believed in it? How many people actually followed it? We don't know. I mean, historians, I'm yet to, I'll answer this better later, sometime after I'm more informed. But I can say this with great confidence about the text itself. Historical evidence is scarce on how pervasive it is. I don't believe that it's been as what Dharamshastric thinking want us to believe. I don't think it's been there continuously in every single part of India. It's not as if India is, as Mr. Louis Dumont, put it, homo hierarchicus. That's not the case. We know that there are lots of resistances to this idea all over, including in Karnataka. No matter what the Lingayats and the Adishaites, Veerashaivites, sorry, the Veerashaivites, what the political preferences are today. We can go back and see how utterly radical they were at the time, from their, well, not from our lights, but their lights, how things were at that time. And you can see, I've been reading very closely the works of Dadu and Kabir recently with some group of scholars, and some of that poetry is just superb. It's not as radical as we might like to believe. It's not, let's not be anachronistic and think that Ambedkar was present in Kabir. That's not true. But there are all sorts of ways in which people are trying to subvert these ideas, or at least not accepting them, right? And how important they become across, and how different upper caste communities try to appropriate them. After all, there are legends about Kabir being born into a Brahmin family and then brought up by a Muslim, which is totally untrue. But nonetheless, that legend has been created, and it's been created for some reason. There's appropriation of Kabir into a Brahminical world. But why would anybody want to do that? So that is also a way of, it just shows the force of an idea which compels even Brahmins to accept and to make Kabir their own. And all these figures play an important role in influencing even political rulers. We know that what we call Kshatriyas are not born into Kshatriyas. They claim Kshatriya who then get recognition. Shivaji is not the only example, even in the past. So it's these categories are not as fixed and as rigid as many people want to believe. We have not been a Varna Ashrama Dharma system, always. I think, frankly, in my poor understanding, I think the worst phase came in the 18th, 19th century. It may have been there earlier as well. But what Ambedkar faced was the worst phase. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. As I said, modernity has been a very unmixed, sort of mixed blessing. Brought in religionization, brought in caste. Doesn't mean caste didn't exist in the past, as many people wrote. It's a colonial construction. No, it's not that. But radical changes took place, and fixities, new kinds of fixities were introduced. So the picture is complicated, but that's not saying very much. Anybody can say, no, things are much more complicated, but that's saying nothing. But I think you understand, what I mean. I think there were 2 or 3 questions. I've answered only one. But maybe time is running out.
Sure, yeah. So I think you raised an important point about anachronistic readings of what some people consider the revolutionary poets. all of those poets, whether it is Kabir or Kanakadasa, had a deep regard for a sacred, omnipotent, omnipresent, power. Um, and with that, I request Smita, my colleague, to deliver the vote of thanks. Thank you so much, sir.
By the way, reading Kabir, I found that there is a Kabir's Ram, which is so overwhelmingly present, who has nothing to do with the Ramcharitmanas Ram, which is of course much later, but it's a Valmiki Ram. It's a very different, but how frequent. But when in my Kabir, kind of not singing, because in singing you find that, but in readings or in textual, a lot of, Kabir that we find has no connection with Ram. He's not seen as part of the Vaishnava tradition at all, but wow, so much a part of that Kabir, real Kabir has so much Ram in it.
Yeah, there's a tradition for that.